Your work bridges psychology, ecology, systems thinking.
Let's talk about this thing as the most important thing right now. Not your job, not your family. I did not have a strong outdoor connection growing up in my family in more of a working class, more industrial area, was where I grew up. Oddly, I feel better about people's innate goodness and more cynical about the evils of certain organizations. So a lot of people blame themselves, but I tell people it's not your fault.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Food Forest podcast. Today with us we have Thomas Doherty. Thomas is not a food forest expert, but he is an expert in climate psychology, a leading voice on climate emotions, and really a trailblazer in climate awareness. What's going on in this world is that a lot of people suffer from eco-anxiety. Some people are literally paralyzed at home, don't want to get out anymore because they're scared of the future. We try to plant trees to have some kind of therapy, but there are more things you can do. I don't know which things, but we have Thomas here who will tell us all about it. Hey, Thomas, how are you doing?
Lewis, it's great to meet you and speak with you.
Yeah, well, I'm super happy you're joining us. Mostly in the Food Forest podcast, we've been talking really nerdy food forest stuff, ranging from medicinal food forestry to silvopasture to all kind of nerdy stuff. But today we're really delving into a more inner part of food forest work. Maybe tell us a little bit about who you are and what it exactly is that you do.
Yeah, I am a psychologist. I live in Portland, Oregon, USA, which is in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., an area that traditionally would have really rich, ancient, tall trees and forests and food that's gathered from the land and from the sea. And I'm from the northeastern part of the U.S. in a place called Buffalo, New York, which is near the Great Lakes. And my story is unique. I did not have a strong outdoor connection growing up in my family in more of a working class, more industrial area was where I grew up. But after I went to college in New York City, I spent time in Europe and Ireland, which is really one of my identity touch points because my grandfather's from Ireland. So I got a chance to spend time on the land in Ireland in the late 80s when it was a quieter place. And then, after I finished my university, I came out west in the U.S. and I did outdoor work. I was an outdoor leader and a river rafting guide. I worked in the Grand Canyon.
Oh, amazing.
And that opened environmental awareness to me, connection with nature, the restorative effects of being in natural places or wild places. And then I channeled that into my work as I became a psychologist. And 20 years ago, this was a kind of a niche area in terms of what we would call eco-psychology or ecotherapy. Obviously, people have always gone to green spaces in nature for restoration and healing and recreation and adventure. But thinking of it more therapeutically as a modality was new. But in the last several years, with the worsening of the climate crisis and various disasters and weather events that have kind of swept the globe, the whole general public now is really aware of these things. And along with that, we have more knowledge about the restorative effects of nature and how being in green spaces is good for our mind and our body. And we also have, as you know, developments in terms of ecology and food systems. And so these things are all sort of coming together now.
Yeah.
In a way that's much more palpable for the general person. And that's kind of where my work is. And I have a book coming out this fall that we can talk about. But there's a ton of connections that we can make.
Yeah, your work bridges psychology, ecology, systems thinking. How would you describe to a 5-year-old what it exactly is you do?
That's a great question. I love questions like that. In fact, some of my best experiences have been going to classrooms with children and talking about these things because they intuitively understand. Let me think about this. I think one of the ideas in my book that's good for adults is this idea of environmental identity, this idea that we all know that we have multiple kinds of identities, facets of our identity, our gender identity, sexual identity, racial identity, cultural identity, national identity. These are all different facets of ourself that we can become aware of and kind of polish and understand, and they give us strength and meaning, right? Environmental identity is also like that. It's your beliefs, attitudes, it's the package of your beliefs, attitudes, opinions, history about yourself in relation to nature and the natural world. And I love opening this idea up to people because then they realize, oh, okay, because of where I grew up and my childhood experiences and my family, I've been building this environmental identity my whole life. I haven't quite thought about it in that way, but often people's work, their passions, their values are all a manifestation of this unique environmental identity, right? And so for adults, it allows them, like they can do a timeline from birth to the present and they can populate it with all the experiences. And it really gives a sense of meaning. Therapeutically, when people are struggling with eco and climate anxiety, they often have all these problems, but they don't have a core of meaning to hold them. So they feel empty and inadequate and overwhelmed. But once you develop your environmental identity, you realize we hurt where we care. I have these concerns because I have values, because of my experience, because of my connection with the land. And once you reconnect people with their values and literally a place, a standing place on the earth, then they can organize themselves around these climate stresses and they don't feel so overwhelmed. And let me just come back to your child question, the 5-year-old. So the nice thing about a 5-year-old is that you can tell them, you have an environmental identity. Because you love nature, you're part of nature, and this is part of who you are. It's some very important part of who you are. In fact, maybe it's the most important part of who you are. It's not secondary because children know this, but it gets dismissed, right? So the sooner you tell someone about their environmental identity, the sooner they can begin to grow it. So it's a real gift for children.
Yeah, that's a beautiful concept. It's something that I've never heard before, environmental identity. Could you compare it, for example, with a fugitive who has their roots in their own country with a lot of history, that they had to fled their country for some reason? Is it for war, for famine, for something else? They have to go to an entirely new place, and there they feel that they don't have, they're not really rooted, and they feel that they have lost their identity. It's a form of disconnection.
Yes.
That they sometimes have. Would you be able to compare those two things a little bit with each other? That the moment they feel rooted again in a culture, they feel whole again, and maybe it's the same with the eco thing, that once you realize that, okay, my name is Louis, I grew up in a temperate climate with a lot of certain trees around me and near the sea and this and that once you realize and embrace that, you feel more grounded to then face the challenges ahead.
Exactly, yeah. And what I say in this work, there's kind of, with a lot of this ecology work, there's level 1 and level 2. There's simple ideas that we can learn about, and then you can get more deeper into it. So the idea of a migrant or refugee, that's kind of much like with therapy. That's a more complicated question, because it is true there you have a situation where people might have had a very distinct connection with the land, very articulate, or they might have been a lot of people and had sort of an intuited kind of, and then yes, it is, they are one of the losses of being an involuntary migrant or refugee, is that you are ripped away from this. So in my book, when I get more deeper into this, I talk about having what I call a diaspora environmental identity or a post-colonial environmental identity. There's a lot of deeper ways to look at this. You could have sort of a fledgling environmental identity where it's a new idea and you're building it, or, a kind of maybe an entrepreneurial environmental identity. There's a lot of different, but yes, that diaspora, is a unique, in fact, many humans in the world, that is their environmental, that is the doorway, at least, to this idea of environmentality, is through loss or disaster. So it is, unfortunately, through trauma and injustice, and that's some of the hard parts of this work. But again, it is a doorway into new possibilities. And also, I think in the modern world, because people can have multiple places they like, you can have multiple kind of standing places, I think, where you're not only, say in a tribal culture, you might have a very specific place, even a literal geographic place that is the center of your culture. Whereas for modern folks, well, much like myself, maybe like yourself, I learned about this later and I have to replant myself, and I have a couple of my home place and then my adopted home. So it's just, we can go on and on with it, but you get the idea.
Yeah. So if I would translate what you just told me, I lived in the south of France, for example, and so my ecological identity, I'm also very much connected with the Mediterranean landscape. For example, if I smell it, it brings me back so many memories and really makes me feel at home. But of course, I was born in Bruges, Belgium, temperate climate near the sea. So that's what you mean, that you can have multiple like places.
And if we're privileged,
ecologies.
we can search for a place that is what we believe our true home is if we are where we're from. In Western society, we have this idea that we can change ourselves and adopt new identities. So some people will travel, and I think humans have always migrated really in some ways, but you can find, like for myself, I really feel at home in the Pacific Northwest. I really feel at home within this particular landscape, and I've lived in different places in the United States. I lived in the desert in Arizona for several years, and I really love the desert, and it's beautiful and magical, but my Northern Irish genes and fair skin and blue eyes doesn't do well in the desert. So there's oddly some resonance between where I live now and the landscape of my ancestors, which the Doherty clan would be in the very northern tip of Ireland in the Inishowen Peninsula, which, as you know, is a rugged kind of sea-blown kind of landscape.
Yeah. So maybe one day I'll find out my identity is really like Hawaii or Canary Islands.
Yeah, I mean, we can balance the carbon footprint and the different things that travel with this idea of love of the earth. There's nothing wrong with loving places and dreaming about places, because the earth, as you know, is beautiful, and so every landscape has something to recommend itself. We have to tease that out from all of the baggage of carbon footprint and environmental destruction and colonialism. It's not easy, but I think there is a path of integrity somewhere in there.
Yeah. When I talk to, for example, clients, when we design a landscape for them, whether it's a simple garden or an entire island we are regenerating, a lot of clients, they really take action because they want to do something for the future.
Yeah.
But a lot of these clients also have emotions. They have fear or anxiety, solastalgia, grief. What do you see as the number one biggest emotion that is really affecting people regarding the changing climate or the warming climate?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a couple of questions in there. One is the relationship between emotions and action, and what's a healthy way to cope as well. Emotions are fascinating, ever-changing. As humans, we are constantly having physical states in terms of taking in information from the environment and having emotional responses that are quite visceral in terms of things we want to go toward and things we're reverse to. And one of the hidden emotions I talk about when I'm doing therapy and counseling is surprise. Usually what happens before eco-grief or eco-anxiety or fear is surprise. Like literally, I am surprised by a news item I see or a weather change that is untraditional. Like suddenly you have this heat that has never been part of your place. And so, that surprise then leads you to some evaluation about the threat, and then you will code it as either fear or anxiety or grief. But what's nice about reminding people about this emotion of surprise is that it gives us this opportunity to be mindful, to be more conscious and be more mindful. Because if I can catch my emotions at the surprise level, then I'm going to be much more able to cope with whatever I'm feeling. So it's about, there's a concept of emotional intelligence, being able to understand and express our emotions and understand and help other people to express their emotions and to have an emotional communication. So what we're talking about here is how to be more emotionally intelligent about all of these issues. So you can see that, a lot of people start in a reactive state. Like, what should I do about this or that emotion? And we need to kind of get ahead of that and start talking about you're ultimately the author of your emotional life, and you can have emotional intelligence. And so what we're doing is sneaking in some empowerment and sneaking in some sense that, I can control this. And then I think it's more likely to, helpful to talk about each person's unique story. Like, what are you feeling? What does it mean to you? Where does it come from? Because it's all normal. People sometimes think they're abnormal or it's wrong to feel sad or grief, but these are very natural feelings. Again, as they say in therapy, we hurt where we care. And so if you're feeling these feelings, it's because something you value is under threat. So, it's just a kind of a gentle acceptance and coaching of these things before, because if you're just plunging into action, then you're really in a reactive state and you're not quite mindful and you might not have the right plan. So the paradox is you need to be able to do no action at all and just be present, at least for a few moments.
Difficult
right?
for a human.
It is difficult, yeah. Now, obviously, if you're in a disaster in a burning building, well, your moment of mindfulness might just be 30 seconds to orient yourself about where the exit is and get out of there, obviously. But if you're dealing with whether you want to change your career or what you want to devote your life to, there's nothing wrong with spending a few weeks or months reflecting on this, because you're going to be much better at whatever you do. But it does require the capacity to hold these feelings and be present. So it's something to work toward.
Yeah.
Because there's a simplistic way of saying, if you're eco-anxious, take action and we'll make you feel better. But that's like level 1. But level 2 is something about, if you're eco-anxious, you need to be able to be comfortable with being anxious and learn how to manifest other emotions first.
Can we have like
a
concrete example? For example, if you talk about surprise, I really remember a time when I was reading the newspaper. It was, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. Europe was super dry, and rivers that were like at the driest point in, I don't know, 100 or 200 years. And there was a place in Italy, I think, where I think 100 or 200-year-old letters said, if you can read this, we're all going to die, or something like that. Yeah. So it's like so deep. And I really remember I was almost crying because of being so sad that the veins of the world are drying out. And so that's then the surprise moment.
Yeah.
So what are like the best steps that, like, for me, for example, in that situation, I would need to go through?
Yeah, I have a catchphrase, and I talk about it in my book, validate, elevate, create. So it's a very simple...
Validate, elevate, create.
Create, yeah. So if I'm talking to you or talking to someone else, the first thing I do is just validate that this is real. This is a real concern. It's normal and obvious in many ways to feel concerned about this. And given your particular environmental identity, background, and deep love of nature, it would be, I'm not surprised at all, really that you're feeling this. And that validation is really helpful, because even in more progressive places, our deep love and connection with nature is often dismissed or belittled or moved aside. There are 3 basic tasks in this work, how we feel about it, how we understand it, and what we do. And most science and policy is about understanding and action. So it's very intellectual.
Yeah.
And the feelings just kind of comes along for the ride. But, the feeling is really important. So, validate the feelings and say, let's say this is really important, then elevate it. Like, let's talk about this thing as the most important thing right now, not your job, not your family, not, making your income. All these are important. But right now, let's talk about this idea that, wow, someone wrote this thousands of years, and now here we are, having this thing. And then let's get creative about it. Like, what does it mean to you? What would you do about it? What should you do about it? What can you do about it? I mean, and also, are you in danger this moment? Right? This idea of present moment safety is really important, because we think because of the vast ability for us to understand and see things through the news, electronic media, we have to teach our body that this isn't happening right this
now.
Minute. When you learned about those rivers at that moment, you might have been okay where you were in your house, and so just realizing, okay, I'm okay right at this moment, but yes, these are important things to me, and I can take action. So it's this really validate, elevate, create, I think is something we can do ourselves, like, because it happens. Like, I'm just as prey to this as anyone else. I'll be going along and I'll see something in the news. I came back from a nice, 3-week travel with my family, and I consciously stayed away from the news, as I recommend to people. But when I came back, here you go, there's all these floods in Texas, and my publisher says, can you write a op-ed about this flood? And I'm like, I don't want to learn about that flood. That's terrible. But it's like, okay, validate what's going on for me, elevate this, get creative, Okay, these floods in Texas are not a surprise. All the policies, all the history, this is just one more example of humans' faulty way of dealing with the environment. And so anyway, that's kind of the attitude to bring into this. But that present moment safety is something to bookmark as an idea, because many times our concerns about climate exist at one remove because we are okay where we are at that moment, and we have the ability to see and plan. So anyway, we can go on, but you can get a sense of it.
Yeah, I really like the concept of present moment safety, because it's like what you say, our brains are wired to, when you see something that's terrible, even if it's like in like 1,000 miles away.
Yes.
You can still feel it and feel like, oh my God, I am there. And it's like with 9/11, people had post-traumatic stress.
Yes.
Because they just watched it via television.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you then, like you say, bookmark it, and every time you feel like this sadness or any kind of emotion, it's say, okay, but am I safe right now? Okay, I am. Am I like in threat right now? Is my house going to be blown away or washed away? No, because it's 20 kilometers away that this is happening, or 2,000 kilometers away. That brings me to the question, if you feel emotions can spiral you downwards, let's say, can spiral you upwards. For example, you have productive anxiety. For example, my personal story, I started a landscape architecture firm that we design landscapes all across the world. And because of the prediction that in 2050, 90% of our Earth will be degraded if we don't do anything. So that's a kind of a productive anxiety that I've got. And I say, okay, what can we do? Okay, let's regenerate as many hectares as possible. Let's go ahead. So it motivates action. It motivates me every day. So it's kind of anxiety that helps me. But you also have paralyzing fear, that you have a kind of fear for the future that just like shuts you down completely. And so how can you recognize when people have crossed that line, or will cross that line, or in some parts already crossed that line?
At some point in the future, we can talk about there was some unique pieces there for you that you were able to channel your concerns into action, maybe because of the resources around you, or your family, or your education, or your personality. And so, that's one, then another question, that comes up is, what is your personal style? No. Luis is Luis, and you're going to do you, or you're going to do you, right? And then other people are going to do their style. I think, with the paralyzing feelings, that requires more compassion and more acceptance. I see these as often a stage, is the way I think about it. It's a natural stage of the process. If I've been going along and I've never really been educated about this stuff and never really thought about climate, or I don't have training in ecology or natural systems or agriculture, then I'm kind of an accident waiting to happen, because I have no bearing on this. And then when the disaster hits, or I read something, or I have this epiphany, my God, the planet is going to die. Like some epiphany that you come to when you see the lines going to the horizon, and you read about some collapse article, or you start to think about the ramifications of water shortages and agriculture, all this heavy knowledge that's out there. It can really be devastating to people. But I see it as a stage. So that's what it's okay. You can get through this. I've been through it. Luis has been through it. Look at all these people, all these experts, all these people that are working, whatever environmental writer, Bill McKibben in the U.S. is famous, or, they've all been through this, and they're still alive, and they're working. And so it's growing up, and it's a rite of passage is the way you might think about this. This is a rite of passage, and, helping people to say, okay, there is something, I can get through this, and I could eventually think about how I can live. For some people, it's going to be really private sphere actions. They're not an entrepreneur. They're not an academic. They don't have wealth to create businesses. They're not a politician. So it's really more about, okay, I can live my daily life through the choices that I make with my family. That's my role. And I can bear witness to things and be honest. For other people, you might, if you're a student, you might channel it into your academic work. If you're a parent, you might channel it into how you raise your children. If you're a business person, you might create a green business. So then that's an exciting conversation, because then you're you're talking about the manifestation of people's dreams and values. But, it's often starts, almost everyone that I've worked with and with the podcast that I do with Pano, all the thinkers, and almost everyone has a wake up story, like a wake up call story. Sometimes people are lucky enough to always have been connected with nature, so they never really had a wake up because they always understood.
Yeah.
But for most people, college, teenage years, adulthood, they had some sort of epiphany.
Yeah. So when you do have a paralyzing fear, validate. Very good to just say, okay, it's okay to have this paralyzing fear, elevate it, and then take action, whether it's like on a very large scale or on a very personal scale, make personal choices, which can even be just a mindset shift.
Yeah. Well, that third step is validate, elevate, create. So it's really get creative. That's the key, because when we have positive or creative emotions, it expands our potential. So action might be one thing. I mean, if it's a very short-term actionable problem, you can take action immediately because it's very clear. But if it's a longer-term, more nuanced, complex problem, rushing into action is often counterproductive. So that validate, elevate, create, sometimes I'll say validate, elevate, and educate. Like, just spend some time educating yourself. We don't really know a lot. Most people only have a small sliver of information, and they think they know the whole. Where often people are quite naive. In fact, the more naive you are, the more likely you are to feel like doom, because you don't know about the solutions. You haven't worked in the area. You haven't met people. Like, think of all the positive people you meet all in your work.
Yeah.
It's like, once you do that, so a lot of people have a small basis of knowledge by which they're judging the future, and it's usually inaccurate. Now, I'm not to say that there's not bad things in the world, but there's at least as much good things in the world. So validate, elevate, educate. Sometimes it's validate, elevate, and meditate. Like, this is humans have struggled with these questions for thousands of years. So it's okay for you to just sit with it a little bit, because if you want to run a marathon, you have to start just walking around the block.
Yeah, true. I'm wondering if there's also maybe an educational, so the more you know, the less anxious you become because you know more. But I sometimes found out, for example, I'm also writing a new book about a lot of climate information as well. Sometimes the more that I know, the more I see how doomed we are. So which actually then increases my anxiety. So in that case,
then I think it's about riding the waves. It's riding the waves of our feelings, because it's true. Knowledge, ignorance is bliss, they might say, right? So it's not black and white. And that's part of the core of this too, is that none of this is black and white. Yes. So we have to expand our ability to take in the good and the bad, right? But yes, it is very existential at the end of the day. Sometimes I take solace in imagining myself at different times. When I was teaching in graduate school and college, I would have an exercise called the time machine exercise. It was a very simple exercise. Just have a chair in the front of the classroom and say, this is a time machine, and you could go to any time in history, 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago, and tell me what the issues are of the world and what were the great challenges of the time. What students find is there's no Eden, really. There's no place to go that in the Crusades or in the U.S. Civil War or during World War II, during the plague, the Roman Empire, there was always challenges that people thought were insurmountable. So that is part of the nature of the world. It's not so much having certainty about the future. It's about having your values and acting on your values and doing the best you can. So, yeah, it's this delicate dance. And also, our emotions are varied because it depends on our rest, our exercise, time of the day, how we take in the news. So we're all prey to down times when we're going to feel, myself, I can be quite cynical, quite sarcastic, quite dark in my humor at different times. And then I also help myself to be more compassionate and grateful and things.
Yeah, it's true. And a lot of things you can do to actually make yourself more at ease and happier. 90% of our happiness hormone is created in our guts. So if we eat healthier food, eat more organic, eat more fibers, feed our gut life, then that alone will already create a better base to start our journey from. So
Yes.
so
Exactly. The mind and the body are connected, and so the mind is often floating on top of what's happening in the body. And then we should also add in here that isolation is one of the biggest risk factors for some of this real deep anxiety, depression, collapse. Either isolation completely, where you have no one to talk to about this, and you have no one to balance yourself out and to validate yourself and have humor. Because if I have comrades and people I'm working with, inevitably we help each other, because I might be down, but my friends are feeling better. And when someone's feeling down, I can help them. So isolation is a problem, either just practically, or being isolated in one small little thinking group, one little area where people keep reinforcing particularly negative collapse messages. It can be kind of cultish, and we have to be careful about the groups. We just have to be mindful of what kind of groups we associate with. And you want to ideally find groups that you feel comfortable, that are doing positive things and that can tap into positive attitudes and positive emotions.
That's so true. I often meet people who, for example, when I talk about climate stuff, that they say, "Oh my God, I'm so happy that I can finally talk to somebody who like understands what I'm going through."
Mm-hmm.
Because if you go to a regular bar, let's say, and you start to say, "Oh, I'm really scared about the climate," a lot of times you can feel alone, because there are a lot of people who like don't know a lot about it or don't care. So what advice would you give people who really feel isolated in their emotions regarding ecology collapsing or climate collapsing?
Yeah.
Finding the anonymous climate anxiety people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, well, obviously we can think about books and the media carefully, but realizing that these are not new ideas, and people have thought about this stuff for a long time. I think generally it's helpful to find every area of the world, no matter where you are, there are environmental workers, groups, environmental nonprofits. Everywhere you are, there's food systems and there's places to work. So I think ultimately making the risk to go out and meet people and show up, you have to. A hidden barrier also with isolation is people feel like they don't know enough, they're not good enough, they're not green enough or smart enough or pretty enough, or they're not cool enough to go to someplace. So you have to kind of work through some of those identity barriers. And I ask people just do low risk adventures, like go to a talk, go to a lecture, go to a book reading, visit a farm. You don't have to join it, you don't have to spend a lot of money, and just expand your horizons a little bit. And just because ultimately we need to find our tribe, our niche.
Yeah.
So the goal is to try to find your niche, your tribe, and find a healthy version of that tribe.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And what I personally think that's also important is, for example, you can have family members or friends who maybe will never care about the climate or care about you being a vegan or a vegetarian or you not flying anymore or whatever your choices are in life. And it's okay to still be in that tribe, love that tribe, but at the same time also build that other tribe. And it's like what you say. If you go to a lecture about the thing you're interested in, you just sit there, you can be pretty anonymous, and you never know, maybe you can start to chat with your neighbor and you become friends, and maybe you ask the guy or woman or ex who's giving the lecture some questions afterwards, and you can start a conversation.
And you're seeing all the people around you that are interested in this as well. Yeah, it comes back. That's why the identity process is helpful, and seeing this. It's a process. It's something. It's a journey. It's a rite of passage. It's a pathway. Just in the classic rite of passage, I love the hero's journey metaphor because it overlays so well on a lot of our experiences. Because when we think of the great adventure stories, the hero doesn't want to leave their comfortable home, No. Frodo in The Lord of the Rings doesn't want to leave his comfortable home, but he's forced to go on this trek. And that's the way it is with this environmental stuff. Yeah, we're forced to, because it's duty or disaster. And then we come out of our comfort zone. We find helpers. Sometimes our helpers are odd or weird, but we got to start somewhere. So yeah, trying to find some, I wouldn't go so far as to say fun, because that's a little bit of a stretch, but, find some meaning, some sense of adventure, some sense of story can be helpful. And then, as we go, we learn, and we have periods of being really excited with new projects. That's another thing. When people first get into things, they get excited and they think, oh, I'm going to finally save the world. And then they realize, oh, my project didn't quite work, or the system is more complicated. And then there's a little bit of a disillusionment. And then you have to realize, okay, I have to come out of that, stick with it, and then I'll get wiser each time I try. So there's this learning curve as well that comes with this.
Yeah. Many of our listeners are from communities that are already under pressure. For example, people in war, in poverty, in displacement, people who are living in very fast desertifying areas or places where ecological collapse is happening right now. So these people are under pressure. They sometimes have the fear of not being able to survive. How can the tools of climate psychology be adapted to people really in an immediate and ongoing crisis?
Yeah, and it's really good that you bring this up. And when I talk, I always say that ultimately all of this is a social justice issue, and because wherever we are, whether it's in Belgium or the United States or even the city that I live in, the environmental problems aren't evenly distributed. They weigh heavier on certain people, usually people that have the least resources, the poorest, the most marginalized, people that are discriminated against in various ways. So we have these sacrifice zones that are created in the world. And it is a really tough realization, but it needs to be named, because this ultimately does come down to politics and action. And I think that's the start, is to name that it is political. In my book, I call the chapter on politics, I call it the hostage chapter, because we're kind of climate hostages. Even people in privileged places are hostage to policies and powers that we don't like and can't control. So we have to come to grips with this powerlessness and hostage situation that we all have, and then take action as we can based on that. I heard a thing just the other day, and you're probably familiar with this, but I had never heard this distinction. Someone did an article, I can send it to you, but an environmental psychology article on ruderal areas that are of landscape that has been disturbed. And I learned that there are different kinds of plants. There are the ruderal plants that are like weeds that grow up in areas that have been recently disturbed, and then you have the other kind of plants that are more adapted to really harsh environments, like a cactus or something like that. And then you have the competitors, which are like the great trees and things that are used to having a stable environment, long-term environment. Then they compete for sunlight and water. And I, not having a background in that area, I didn't know what the ruderal term meant. And once I looked it up, I realized, this is an entry into ecotherapy, because when I go to a landscape that's been disturbed or destroyed, the species that are going to thrive there are the weedy, really tough plants. And so there's a metaphor there, I think, for us as humans. We want to be the competitors in the stable, nice climate forests, the ones that we like. And some of us, are adapted to really tough desert type conditions, but we're being forced to be, these ruderal creatures that, have to be kind of like weeds in a way. I don't know. It's just an idea that I've been kind of playing around with, but I think the metaphor is unique. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I really like it. It's something we use in designing landscapes, knowing which kind of situation you have. Are we going to use stress-tolerant plants? Are we going to use ruderal plants? These are like different plant strategies, and I personally think it's applicable to people as well. You have people who are more stress resilient and other people who would almost die because of the stress. The same with plants, and then the same with the ruderals. Then you would say people who really adapted to very strange conditions. So I think it's a very nice way of thinking about it. I, for example, also compare personality types to climate plants, and pioneer plants. Some people are pioneer plants who then, for example, if you have rubbish ground, that like pioneer this rubbish ground and make it a little bit more fertile, and then the climax plants can come in, and then the pioneers go to new territories. So I think those are definitely connected. But even with these analogies, a lot of people are not stress tolerant plants, let's say. Do you have like psychological tools that you can use if you really in that moment of distress, if another drought means that you might not have an income next year from your farm, for example?
Yeah, those are tough questions. I think the way I start is this concept of personal sustainability. So I try to help people bring their abstract thoughts about sustainability to play in their personal life. So, for example, my rest and sleep, my diet, my exercise, my social support. So I think in really tough situations, we have to get really granular about our self-care. And so that means, can I get rest? Can I eat? Can I have social support? When we're, more comfortable, we can kind of take that for granted and then focus on our dreams and our visions. But in really tough situations, we have to come back down to maybe there's 10 things that I do every day to help me get through this day. And this happens even someone who's privileged, if they're going through graduate school or going through a tough time or dealing with a health crisis or an addiction. It's really basic. I'm going to get a certain amount of sleep. I'm going to make sure that I eat healthy. I'm going to stay hydrated and drink water because we are, of course, part of nature and we are like plants and animals. And I'm going to get social support. I am going to take action, and really boiling things down to just the essentials. And I think that's what we have to do. Like if you or I were trapped in a disaster, like a flood or a fire or an earthquake, that's what we would do naturally. And it would be a victory to get through each day. Yeah. Each day would be, in a disaster, even an hour or 10 minutes is a victory, right? So I think it's not a good place to be, but we need to be able to come down to the real essentials.
Yeah, and it makes me think about circle of influence. There are a lot of things you can change. For example, the weather. It's very difficult to change the weather as a farmer or as a smallholder or as a gardener. But you can control. But I hope you can control how much you sleep, or control the things that you can control, and that gives you stability. Oh, that's super interesting.
Or at least be aware of these things, because if we're not aware that we're sleep deprived or dehydrated, right, we are going to be irritable. We're going to be angry. So we have to be mindful of our personal sustainability.
Yeah. You're deeply influenced by systems thinking. I'm curious, in permaculture, you have the 12 global design principles. Can you relate your emotional work to these 12 global design principles? For example, are there psychological equivalents to use edges and value the marginal, or apply self-regulation and accept feedback? These are, for example, 2 permaculture principles. Do you have analogies for your work?
I think so. I mean, I understand permaculture in general, but I'm not well versed in all the principles. But my understanding, permaculture has always been psychological. My understanding of it, like the people who developed it were thinking on these multiple levels, because that's the systems thing, that it is multiple levels and analogies and things like that. But yeah, I find, that those kind of principles are a neat doorway into health, essentially, because what we're talking about is what's a healthy landscape. And ultimately, my belief is that if health begets health. So if from a systems perspective, if I'm helping a system to be healthy in any form, that's going to radiate out into the system in different ways. And things radiate from natural systems to human systems and vice versa. So if I have a healthy human system, where people are practicing good democracy and policies, and that's going to radiate into a healthy land. I mean, I think these are intimately connected physically and also, I don't know, in ways that we can't always predict, So yes, we have experiences that are on the edge between one state and the other, like one emotion, like working with our emotional intelligence. We have, we feel hundreds of feelings every day. And then there are edges between grief and hope. And then sometimes we're working the edge between those two things when we're dealing with tough things. So yeah, I think those principles by nature are applicable because they're helping a system to be healthy.
Yeah. How do you personally design your inner world? Do you have rituals or mental design principles that shapes your resilience?
That's a good question. I mean, I try to practice the idea of personal sustainability and validate, elevate, create. I mean, the book that I just got a galley of my book in advance copy, and it's really nice to hold it in
amazing.
my hand, and it took some years.
The feeling, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and it's
happy for you.
It's the first book that I've written outside of my dissertation in graduate school, and I never thought it would happen. I really talk about hopelessness. I dealt with hopelessness many, many times along the way. Who am I to talk about climate, and who am I to try to tell people how to cope? I mean, so it takes some belief in the ideas, but yes, I try to get out into nature. In the book, I talk about a spectrum of nature, trying to break down this abstract idea of nature into a spectrum from virtual nature, which would be like this photo of this lake behind me, to, art, to domestic nature, like the plants or decorations in your home, or pets, companion animals, and then nearby nature, like your neighborhood and the community, and then a working nature, farms, agricultural areas, logging, and then sort of retreat or protected nature like parks and refuges, and then wild spaces, which could be like remote places like in the mountains or out in the ocean or in the wilderness, the designated wilderness area. And there's a whole spectrum of nature, and helping people to realize that and realize we gravitate to different parts of that spectrum. Some people are city people. Some people are more rural people. Some people are more mountaineer types that want to really get out. Other people want to decorate their home and have house. I can't make houseplants go very well. I'm not a good green thumb, but some people have beautiful, verdant homes, right? And so we have different styles. And so that's one thing that I think about, and I try to touch on different of those. And I have my growth areas. So that's one of my, ideas, and all. That's something that I try to translate into my life.
All right. Now I'm going to ask you some short questions to wrap up this episode.
Sure.
To, make people think and make you think as well.
Yeah.
What moment in your career or life you felt you truly failed?
Tell me. Okay, I thought I was waiting for more. What moment in my career life that I truly felt?
Failed.
I'm sorry.
It's my English, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I felt. Well, failure is certainly a feeling that I had failed. Well, yeah, these are a challenging question. Let me think about that. Well, I tried to write other books in the past. When I was a teacher, I tried to write a book, and then, unfortunately, this is a personal story. My wife developed breast cancer, and I really had to help her, and so I had to let that go.
I'm sorry to hear.
So I would say that I was harboring feelings of failure about not manifesting a book and not really capturing these ideas. So this book that I do have, it has been an existential quest. One of my challenges is that I am a big thinker, and I do think about a lot, but it's easier for me to think than to write. So, for a long time I was harboring failures that I hadn't fulfilled some of my potential.
Have you ever burnt out during your work? And if yes, what pulled you back?
Yes, I have. Often it's in hindsight, you don't realize it at the time, but only after. I mean, I know during when I was studying in graduate school to be a psychologist, I was burned out, where I was working nights at a hospital, and being really angry and depressed and irritable and having physical ailments, and I just developed like shingles, like a infection.
Oh my God.
That was all, and I was younger and healthier, but I was really, these were signs of physical breakdown. So we can have that.
What pulled you back?
That's a good question. Stubbornness and sticking with sticking with the process. And I think I think what it was. I'm going to have to reflect on that a little bit, actually. But I think what happened was I had enough healthy things going, and I moved through a really difficult period of time, and then I think I got through it, and then I kind of built more experience. So it was a bit of like climbing Mount Everest, and you get to a very dangerous place, and then when you get through that, you come back to more of a livable environment. But I'm gonna think on that a little bit.
All right. I'm gonna spare that for our next episode together.
Yeah.
Your podcast.
Exactly. I will.
Is there something that you believed 10 years ago about human nature and climate that you do not longer believe?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I talk about fossil fuel propaganda in my book, and just these messages we were given about personal carbon footprint and that it's people's fault. And I've really come to learn that so much of our climate situation has been artificially created by organizations and corporations to divide people and to stifle change. And I feel like I feel better about people's innate goodness and more cynical about the evils of certain organizations. But so much of our climate problems are not because humans are uninformed or some sort of primitive. I mean, native cultures learned millennia ago to live in healthy ways. So humans have it within us naturally. Yeah. We've been stifled. So a lot of people blame themselves, but I tell people it's not your fault. There's been players that have stopped healthy change that easily could have happened. And that's something I've really become clearer about in the last decade.
That's so true. I'm like a natural optimist and a natural believer in the goodness of people. But also while doing research for a book that I'm writing, one of the books that really opened my mind again, because I read it before, but now I read it again, and it's Merchants of Doubt.
Yes, yeah. Classic book, yeah.
It's really like just scripts that the cigarette industry is using.
Yes.
The asbestos industry is using, the anti-climate businesses are using, and that you say, well, oh my God, they're just literally like playing around with us and screwing us so hard. I can totally relate to that.
Yeah. I wasn't aware of the depth of that 10 years ago, and now I am, for better or for worse.
Yeah. But it's good. It's good that people know that it comes from somewhere.
Because you have something to go after, and something that's why the legal challenges that are happening around the world are so important.
All right, we're gonna end with some vision and legacy questions. What kind of emotional and cultural literacy do we need most by 2035 to meet the climate crisis?
Well, I would come back to this idea of environmental identity. And if we made environmental identity a more commonly discussed term, and we didn't fall into the trap of thinking it was just simply an environmentalist identity or a permaculture identity, but those are variations of environmental identity. But there are many kinds of environmental identity that we can sort of work together. Say between traditional agriculture and permaculture, between conservatives and progressives, because right-wing conservative people also love nature, and they have gardens, and they want to take their children and grandchildren to the seashore. So there's a lot of connection around environmental identity. Oh, yeah. No matter what country you're in, whether you're from Africa or India or New Zealand or Italy, there are healthy manifestations of environmental identity. If we can celebrate that, I think that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah. Are there certain philosophers, writers, spiritual thinkers, or friends that really helps you?
Yeah, I was gifted a book called Hiking Zen, which I recommend. It's a small little book I got gifted, and it's about Zen Buddhism and hiking, and it's written by two monks that lead long hikes on like the Appalachian Trail in the U.S. One monk is from Europe, one monk is from the U.S., and there's nothing particularly new in there if you know about Buddhism or Thich Nhat Hanh. They were followers of Thich Nhat Hanh at Plum Village. And I know about that, but it was really helpful for me to revisit it again. Mindfulness, in-breath, out-breath, that beautiful kind of sense of inner being that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about. I needed a refresher on that. And because these monks are doing it in the context of a nature hike, it really was helpful to me. So I'm not a practicing Zen Buddhist, I appreciate all kinds of spirituality, but it really does help me to tap into certain of these traditions. It really is really healthy for me.
Nice. Good for you. One last question before we wrap up this episode. If you had a magic stick, a magic wand, what would you use it for? You could do anything you want with no limitations.
Well, that's funny. I have an old therapy story about that, where I would talk to a client and I would say, if I had a magic wand and I could wave it over you and make things better in the way you want. And then I went away for 2 weeks, and then I came back and I just watched you from a distance, and I observed, what would I see that would tell me that things were better.
Oh, nice.
And that was a way for people to visualize a positive outcome for their life.
Oh, nice.
And so I would say I don't really have a magic wand, but in many ways you do, because you can see something that's measurable. So that's how I would use my magic wand.
Individually, with clients, with patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To help to you can use a magic wand as a visioning tool to say, in 2 weeks, if your life was healthier, even in a disaster zone, even in a very terrible refugee situation, in 2 weeks, if your life was better, what would it look like practically? Not magically, but really practically.
Yeah.
And what would I see if I observed you from a distance? And that forces people to put their goals into behavioral terms.
Yes.
So it's a good little psychological approach.
So you wouldn't really use the wand. You would just...
Yeah. I'm avoiding your question in some ways because I'm not.
But it's your right.
Yeah. But
that's okay.
Yeah, I would you could say, imagine the world that you want, and then what can you do practically to work toward it? What's one step?
Yeah.
Whether the wand says water, water for everyone, or food forests, because we need, one of the casualties of doom and burnout is our capacity to dream is damaged, and people feel like it's not okay to dream. Children will dream and young people will dream, but adults like us, we start to lose that ability if we don't maintain it.
Yeah. Well, I've learned a lot thanks to you, Thomas. Thank you so much. I learned that it's okay to feel climate emotions, that we have to validate them, elevate them, and then regarding which situation you're in, educate, meditate, take action. So I'm really happy with it, and I also really like the time machine chair, because it really puts everything in perspective. And it's like, all right, you're feeling anxious right now about where you are. Well, sit on that chair and go back into a time you would prefer. And then just say, okay, but if you choose that time, then you'll have this. Would you also feel anxious? Oh, yeah, maybe I would. Or if you go to the Romans, okay, yes, I would also feel anxious. Oh, you would go back to the 1960s. Oh, yeah, I would also feel anxious because of this. And there, like you say, throughout history, there's always something to be anxious about. And maybe it will always be that way in the future as well.
And good things to work toward, and good people to connect with. Always, there's always good people and good things to work for in all these times. Being part of the solution.
Yeah, and that's very hopeful. The same with what can you control. For example, even if you feel like totally distressed, it's like, okay, well, can I sleep enough? Can I have social contacts? Can I build a social safety net around me? Can I eat well? Can I drink well? Do I have like maybe breathing exercise, even if it's only 30 seconds a day? So these are a lot of very practical tips that I hope that food foresters who sometimes might have anxiety or emotions about climate collapse or environmental collapse can help. So thank you so much, Thomas, for being here.
Thank you.
Are there any last final words you would like to share? Maybe I will first remind the audience so that Thomas written a fantastic book, Surviving Climate Anxiety, a guide to coping, healing and thriving. So I think if you read that book that you will learn a lot more about it. But any more last words you would like to share, Thomas?
Well, thanks for the invitation. Part of my self-care is talking to people like yourself that are, like I tell people all the time, I didn't know you, and now I know about you, and I know that you and all your colleagues and people are working there. And now I have a positive thing to think about. And so, it really is important for me to speak to people like yourself, and also to know that we understood each other in different ways. So that was just really great.
Nice.
Yeah.
Rest assured, there are people who are planting food forests
Yes.
that are solving climate change, that are solving
and we need to
a lot
spread
of
the word
stuff.
about that. And it's a really good thing to, before you go to bed, to tell yourself there are people right now planting food forests all around the world. And that's a very comforting thought. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Good luck with your book. And see you soon.
All right. Take care.